It happened in a heartbeat, a tiny gesture from a young princess that changed everything. The cameras caught it, but few understood what they were really seeing. Princess Charlotte, poised beside her mother, glanced toward the royal guard, and with one discreet movement sent a silent signal that broke centuries of royal protocol. And what the guard did next left the entire crowd breathless. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't disobedience, it was something deeper. A moment of pure humanity inside a world ruled by rules and ceremony. A simple exchange that revealed the warmth, courage, and quiet empathy of a little girl who may one day change the monarchy's heart forever. If stories like this remind you that even inside the most guarded walls, kindness still finds a way, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this video. We post the real emotional moments that history books overlook. Moments that prove even royal hearts beat just like ours. Now, let's go back to that day and uncover what really happened. It was one of those mornings when London seemed to shine a little brighter, as if even the sky knew something special was about to happen. The kind of day where tradition meets time, where centuries of royal history echo through the cobblestone streets. The Union Jack fluttered above Buckingham Palace, and the sound of brass horns rippled across the crowd gathered outside the gates. Thousands had come to witness the royal ceremony, one that promised pomp, discipline, and just a hint of magic. Among the dignitaries, guards, and royal photographers stood a small figure, Princess Charlotte of Wales. Dressed in a soft blue coat that matched her mother's elegant ensemble, she looked every inch the poised young royal. Yet behind that grace was something no title could define. The gentle curiosity of a child trying to understand a world built on rules she was still learning. Her mother, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, bent slightly to whisper something in her ear. Charlotte nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. It was a moment so small that most cameras missed it, but those close enough noticed how the little princess straightened her posture, the same way her grandmother, Princess Diana, once did before facing the press. The royal guard stood in perfect formation. Rows of scarlet uniforms, polished boots, and gleaming rifles aligned with military precision. Every motion was measured. Every breath seemed synchronized. To the untrained eye, it looked flawless. Yet beneath the surface, the air was thick with tension. These men were more than ceremonial figures. They were living symbols of discipline, each move bound by centuries of unbroken tradition. The band began to play God Save the King. The familiar anthem swept over the crowd like a wave. Phones rose into the air, capturing every second, every glance. Charlotte's brothers, George and Louis, stood beside her. George solemn and composed, Louis a little restless. And Charlotte? She stood perfectly still, watching, listening. Her gaze wandered across the line of guards, her eyes landing on one man near the front. He was older than the others, maybe late 30s. His uniform was pristine, his jaw tight with concentration. But there was something in his face, something human. Maybe it was the faint tremor in his hand, or the way his eyes flickered toward the young princess when no one else was looking. Later, people would say she must have sensed it, that a childish intuition saw what the cameras didn't see. But in that moment, no one knew that this quiet exchange of glances would soon ripple through royal history. The ceremony continued. Step, march, salute, repeat. But the weather began to shift. The sunlight dimmed under passing clouds, and a light wind brushed through the courtyard. Charlotte squinted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Her small gloved hand brushed against her coat button, fidgeting. A tiny, almost invisible movement. Catherine gently placed her hand over Charlotte's, grounding her in the moment. Still, Charlotte's attention was locked on that one guard. He looked pale now, almost struggling to maintain his posture, his jaw clenched, his breathing shallow. But protocol demanded stillness, absolute silence and immobility until the ceremony's close. And this was no ordinary event. Cameras from around the world were watching. Breaking formation, even for a moment, could mean dismissal, disgrace even. Charlotte tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. A subtle frown creased her brow. Something was wrong. To most children, that would have been the end of it, curiosity fading as quickly as it came. But Charlotte was no ordinary child. She'd been raised watching her mother's grace and her father's duty. She understood in her own quiet way that being royal wasn't just about waving to crowds. It was about seeing people. So when that guard's knees began to tremble, when his shoulders sagged ever so slightly, she did something that would later make headlines around the world. She sent a signal.
It wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. It wasn't even obvious. Just a tiny, deliberate movement. Something that, on the surface, looked like a child adjusting her coat. But her gaze didn't waver. Her eyes met his for one brief second. Calm, steady, almost commanding. And that was all it took. The guard blinked, his breathing shallow. His discipline fought against instinct. But something in that look, that unspoken understanding, cut through the noise of duty. He shifted ever so slightly, breaking the stillness that defined centuries of ceremony. One step, just one, enough to catch the attention of another guard beside him, who quickly steadied his comrade's shoulder. The cameras flashed. The moment passed in a blur. And for most people watching, it was nothing, a minor movement in a sea of perfection. But for those who noticed, it was extraordinary. Later, royal commentators would call it the human heartbeat beneath the crown. Others would say it was proof that the spirit of Diana, that intuitive compassion, lived on in her granddaughter. But that day, no one could yet grasp the emotional depth of what had just unfolded. A child had seen what trained adults had missed. A simple, instinctive act of care had broken through the strict walls of royal decorum. And in doing so, Princess Charlotte reminded everyone that true nobility isn't taught, it's felt. The ceremony continued. Applause, salutes, the carriage rolling through the gates. Charlotte waved to the crowd, her smile shy but genuine. But the guard she'd silently helped, he was quietly escorted out minutes later, his hand trembling, but his eyes filled with gratitude. He'd been on the verge of collapsing from heat exhaustion. That single second of defied protocol had likely saved him. And when the royal family returned inside, Catherine leaned down, smiling softly. "What made you look at him, darling?" she whispered. Charlotte's reply was simple. He looked sad. At first, no one could explain it. The footage replayed across television screens and social media feeds. A fraction of a second that seemed so small, yet so strangely powerful. Did she just do something? One royal watcher whispered in a news clip. It's like she knew. Rewind. Slow motion. Zoom in. Every frame told the same story. Princess Charlotte standing still among the glittering ceremony, her gloved hand brushing her coat. Then a subtle flick of her fingers, almost like a coded motion. Her gaze fixed on a single guard. And in that instant he moved, ever so slightly, just enough to catch himself before disaster. The internet called it the royal signal. Others called it the moment duty met instinct. But to those who understand royal tradition, it was something astonishing. You see, the royal guards of the United Kingdom are trained with a discipline few can imagine. They are taught to remain still no matter what, through rain, heat, feigning spells, or sudden noise. To move without command is to defy centuries of protocol. But when a little princess met his eyes that day, the rules quietly shifted. It wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. Somewhere deep in that soldier's training, behind all the salute drills and posture commands, lives a simple truth. The royal family isn't just a duty, it's a bond. And bonds, when tested by empathy, have a way of breaking even the firmest lines. Let's go back to that moment. The exact second Charlotte made her move. The wind caught her hair, just a wisp across her cheek. She brushed it away, looking toward the line of guards. Her hand paused, fingers pressed together, then released in a small, deliberate motion. It wasn't a wave, not quite a gesture, more like a signal she'd seen her mother use during public events, a soft, composed way to communicate without words. But this time, it wasn't for royal elegance. It was for connection. Observers noticed her posture shift, that unmistakable confidence she inherited from Catherine. There was no panic, no childish fluster, just a calm awareness, almost instinctive, like she understood something the adults didn't. The guard, meanwhile, felt the world spinning. Heat exhaustion and rigid armor don't mix well. His vision blurred, his knees trembled, He knew the rules: stand tall, do not move. But the silent communication from a young princess, that piercing, compassionate look, broke through his fog. And in that single breath, he made the decision no royal guard is supposed to make. He stepped slightly back, just enough to regain his balance. A breach of protocol, but also an act of preservation for both himself and the image of royal composure. Had he collapsed, the ceremony would have been halted, the press would have swarmed, and the dignity of the occasion might have been overshadowed. Instead, the world witnessed something much rarer: humanity shining quietly within the bounds of discipline. Later, royal insiders revealed that the guard, once safely recovered, had quietly expressed his gratitude. He reportedly said, "She saw me before I fell." 5 words, but ones that summed up the heart of the moment. Now imagine that, a child, no more than 8 years old, standing before the weight of centuries, and still able to notice one man's silent struggle. That's not mere coincidence. That's empathy in its purest form. And it wasn't the first time. Close royal aides have often described Charlotte as unusually perceptive. She reads the room, one palace staff member said. Even when she was very small, she'd notice if someone was sad, and she'd go up and comfort them without being told. Sound familiar? It should. That same intuition once defined another princess, her late grandmother, Diana. There's a kind of symmetry in that legacy, isn't there? Diana once bent royal rules to comfort those who were ignored. She hugged patients others wouldn't touch. She stopped her motorcade to speak to a crying child. And now, decades later, her granddaughter had broken a smaller, quieter rule, but one that echoed with the same emotional truth. You can almost picture Diana smiling at that moment, watching from somewhere unseen, her spirit woven into that tiny gesture Charlotte made. After the ceremony, the palace staff reviewed footage, as they often do for security purposes. No one reprimanded the guard. No memo circulated about breach of conduct. In fact, one unnamed officer reportedly said, "If that little girl hadn't done what she did, we might have lost a man that day." The royal family, ever careful with public perception, said nothing officially. But Catherine Small, knowing smile as she left the ceremony, told the story in silence. And when Charlotte climbed into the carriage, cameras caught her glancing back, not toward the crowd, but toward the guard's post. She smiled faintly. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even relief. It was something simpler: understanding. She had done what her heart told her to do. By the time the clip reached the internet, the moment had already gone viral. Princess Charlotte's secret signal became one of the most replayed royal videos of the year. Comment sections overflowed with emotion. She's got Diana's heart. A true leader in the making. Even a child can see what duty sometimes hides. But perhaps the most beautiful part wasn't the online noise. It was what revealed about the next generation of royals. Charlotte didn't just follow rules. She felt them, and when her instinct whispered that something wasn't right, she acted with grace, not defiance. That's what makes her moment so remarkable. It wasn't about breaking protocol for attention. It was about breaking silence for compassion. And maybe that's why the world stopped for that 1-second signal. Because it reminded us that behind every royal wave, every grand ceremony, when the royal guard still beats a very human heart, by an inch, one that sees, feels, and when it matters most, in a wall of centuries-old discipline, a breath in a world that demanded silence. You have to understand, for a guard to move without order is no small thing. It's an act that, under normal circumstances, could mean reprimand, even removal from duty. These men are trained to stand still through hours of heat, exhaustion, and pressure. Their stillness is a symbol of the crown itself, unwavering, unshakable, unyielding. And yet, in that moment, in the shadow of Buckingham's grandeur, one guard made a choice that broke the pattern. Because sometimes doing the right thing means bending the rule. The moment his boots shifted, it was almost imperceptible, a subtle motion, masked by ceremony. His fellow guards noticed. Their eyes flickered for a split second, uncertainty passing between them. But then quietly instinct took over. The guard beside him reached out, steadying his comrade's arm, hiding the movement from the crowd's view. To the untrained eye, nothing had happened. The formation remained flawless. The royal rhythm continued. But to those men standing there, the ones who knew exactly what stillness meant, they all felt it. Something real had just happened. And up on the steps, Princess Charlotte had seen it too. Her eyes softened. The faintest smile tugged at the corner of her lips, not one of triumph, but of quiet relief. That single act, that breath of defiance, carried more humanity than 1,000 salutes. Moments later, as the ceremony drew to a close, the guard was quietly replaced. Protocol, after all, demanded order. But this time, there was no harsh reprimand, no public embarrassment. Behind the scenes, it was handled differently, because when the commanding officer reviewed what had happened, he saw what everyone else had seen: the faint signal from the young princess, the guard's near collapse, and the delicate way the situation resolved without disrupting the ceremony. And in a private conversation that would never make the tabloids, the officer reportedly said something that summed up the entire event. He didn't fail his duty. He remembered his humanity. That line would echo among the regiment for weeks afterward. It wasn't just about one soldier's step. It was about what it meant to be loyal. Was loyalty only about obedience? Or could it also mean recognizing the people we serve as human beings? For the royal family, too, it struck a chord. Behind palace walls, discussions quietly took place. Catherine, ever the empathetic mother, reportedly spoke gently about the moment to palace staff later that day. "She's always been observant," she said softly, "and kind. She didn't think. She just cared." The queen, when told what had happened, supposedly gave a rare smile. "Ah," she murmured, "the girl's got her grandmother's instincts." You could almost feel the generations aligning in that sentence, Diana's compassion flowing into Charlotte's calm awareness. Two princesses bound not by title, but by heart. And for the guard himself, the man who dared to defy protocol, the moment marked him forever. After being examined by medics, he insisted he was fine. But when asked later about what had gone through his mind, he said quietly, "I looked at her, and it was like she was telling me it's all right to breathe." Can you imagine that? A lifetime of training, a wall of ceremony, shattered by a child's steady eyes. The story spread like fire through the ranks. Young guards whisper about the princess's signal, a myth now whispered through drill lines and break rooms, a story that reminded them they weren't statues in uniform. They were men serving a family, and that family, at least in one small girl's eyes, saw them as people, not symbols. Then came the public wave. By the next morning, newspapers across Britain and beyond carried the still images. Charlotte's subtle gesture, the guard half-step, the soft expression on her face. Headlines called it a moment of grace at the palace. Others labeled it the protocol of the heart. Commentators debated. Was it deliberate? Did she know what she was doing? Or was it just a coincidence? But those who've been there said the same thing. It wasn't chance. Royal protocol is a fortress, precise, rehearsed, emotionless. But that day, a single act of empathy slipped through the cracks, and the world saw the truth. The crown might be built on duty, but strength lies in compassion. And isn't that the paradox of royalty? To represent something greater than yourself. Yet still remember that what truly endures isn't ceremony, it's connection. When Charlotte returned home that evening, she reportedly asked her mother a quiet question over tea. "Mummy," she said, "will he get in trouble because of me?" Catherine smiled softly, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's face. "No, sweetheart. You helped him. You did what was right." Charlotte nodded, thoughtful, but I didn't mean to break a rule. Her mother paused, her tone gentle. "Sometimes," she said, "rules are there to protect. But kindness is what protects people." That conversation would later be quoted by a royal insider, a rare glimpse into the private lessons shaping the next generation of royals. And for those who serve in the King's Guard, that day became something almost sacred, an unspoken reminder that even in uniform, it's all right to be human. Weeks later, during another ceremony, a small detail went unnoticed by most, but not by those who remembered. A fresh flower had been quietly placed near the guard's post when the event happened. No one knew who put it there, but when Charlotte walked past, her eyes lingered on it. She smiled again, faintly, knowingly, Because sometimes defiance isn't loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a breath and as powerful as compassion itself. Days passed. The carriages had long rolled away. The palace gates closed, and the ceremony faded into memory. Yet, across social media, television, and even quiet living rooms, one question lingered. What did that little girl see that no one else did? Because the moment refused to die. Clips kept circulating, slowed down, analyzed, replayed. Royal experts dissected her body language. Psychologists commented on the instinct of empathy in children. And every viewer seemed to feel the same strange tug in their heart. It wasn't just that she had acted, it was how she acted, without words, without permission, without hesitation. In a world so often obsessed with rules, here was a child who listened to something far simpler, that small, powerful voice inside that said, "Someone needs help." And that's why it struck a chord. Because deep down, people didn't see a princess. They saw a person. A little girl who reminded the world that compassion doesn't wait for approval. It just happens. Royal historians began reflecting on it in broader context. Every royal generation seems to have its defining moment, that one image that captures its spirit. For Queen Elizabeth, it was her unwavering duty during wartime. For Diana, it was a hug, the touch that shattered stigma. And for young Charlotte, perhaps it was this, a single glance that restored the warmth behind the crown. A royal commentator on BBC later said, "It wasn't the ceremony that moved people that day. It was a reminder that empathy, even from a child, carries more power than any trumpet fanfare." In classrooms, teachers shared the clip to talk about kindness. Parents showed their children the video, saying, "See, even a princess can care about someone others overlook." That tiny, human gesture became a lesson, not just for royal watchers, but for everyone living in a world that often forgets to look up and notice others. And the royal guard himself? He returned duty quietly a week later. But when asked by a journalist what he thought of all the attention, he simply said, "All I know is she saw me when I needed someone to." There was no grand statement, no need for ceremony, just gratitude. And perhaps that's what made it so powerful. The humility on both sides of the moment. Behind palace doors, the royal family had their own quiet reflections. Catherine reportedly spoke to Charlotte about what happened again. She didn't praise her like a celebrity. She guided her like a mother. She told her, one palace aide later shared, that kindness isn't about being seen. It's about doing the right thing even when no one notices. And that was exactly it. The magic of the moment wasn't in the cameras or headlines. It was in the simplicity. A child who didn't know the rules well enough to overthink, who simply followed her heart. William, too, was said to be deeply moved. Friends close to the prince mentioned how the event reminded him of his late mother's spirit, how Diana could always sense pain even in the middle of a crowd. "Charlotte has that same light," he told one confidant, "the same instinct." It's strange, isn't it? How a gesture that lasted less than a second could echo through generations. But that's what happens when authenticity meets legacy. As the months rolled on, the story faded from headlines but not from hearts. Every so often, it would resurface, on anniversaries and highlight reels, in quiet tributes to royal humanity. And each time, people would still pause to feel that same warmth. Maybe because in a world of headlines about scandal and division, that one clip stood for something beautifully rare. Goodness without agenda. Charlotte didn't act to be seen. The guard didn't move for recognition. Both simply felt. And that's what made it unforgettable. In one interview, a former palace guard said something that perfectly summed it up. That's what the monarchy is meant to represent. Duty, yes, but also compassion. That girl reminded us of the second half. There's a saying often quoted in royal circles. Nobility isn't in the title. It's in the heart that carries it. And maybe that's what people were truly responding to. Not the crown, not the protocol, but the reminder that empathy doesn't need grandeur. It only needs courage. Because empathy, when acted upon, becomes something sacred. And in that single second, that fleeting connection between a royal child and a weary guard, empathy became visible. In the years ahead, royal watchers would no doubt look back on that small moment as something symbolic, not just of Charlotte's character, but what the future monarchy could become. More open, more human, more aware of the people who serve it. That's the beauty of such stories. They ripple quietly. They start with one small act and end up teaching millions what true grace looks like. So, as the sun set on that day in London, the city lights reflecting off the palace gates, it wasn't just the sound of ceremony that lingered in the air. It was the echo of something softer, a heartbeat, a glance, a shared humanity between two souls divided by duty but united by compassion. And though history books may never mark the moment in ink, it lives on in something far more enduring: memory. Because sometimes the grandest gestures aren't made by kings or queens, but by a little girl who simply looked up, saw someone struggling, and cared enough to do something about it.